Okay. So what we are going to be doing today is going over the thrust plate instead of the part that I had sent out at the end of last week. Because the thrust plate is a little more, I mean, it's the same kind of part, like same process basically. So I figured it was a little bit more related to rockets and stuff. So this is the thrust plate from last year, and I just sent a PDF drawing of it in the Slack if you want to pull that up. And basically, we're just going to go through two ways of making this part. The first one is going to be using what we've learned already, which is the extrude, like sketching and extruding. And then we'll go into using patterns and revolves and stuff to show a bit of a better way to do it. But if both of you have SolidWorks open, you can just go in and make a new part. Again, if it doesn't say it down here, just change it to inch, pound, second. That'll make all the dimensions that you do right. But so looking at the part that we're interested in here, it's a relatively simple part, not entirely 2D because it does have this step, but not terribly complicated by any stretch of the means. So what we'll start with is just making an extruded face, like extrude out the circle on the bottom here. So come up to the left and hit Extruded Boss Base. We can select the top plane because this is going to be like on the bottom of the rocket. So we want to extrude the circle facing upwards. And then we can draw some circles. So we'll start by drawing two circles here. And we can see this outside one is going to be 6.12 inches. And this inside one is going to be 3.11. So come up to the left, hit Smart Dimension, pull it out. Just type in the dimension that you want. And then when you're done, you can hit Escape to back out of the tool. Stop me if you're having trouble with any of these things, but assuming you're not, this is the basic profile of what the part is going to look like. So we'll hit Exit Sketch. That'll bring us out. And we want to choose how far we want to extrude this. So we can use the box over here. And looking at the part, we're just going to do the bottom circle with this extrude. So that's 0.19, 0.38. So this one is also 0.19. These are truncated dimensions, so it's not entirely accurate, but we'll change that to 0.19. And then we can hit OK. And then if we're using extrusions, we're going to want to make another extrusion on this top face to get that step in. So we'll select the top face, go up to the left and do Extruded Boss Base again. And you can hit, remember, Control-8 will bring you normal to the sketch plane or the face you have selected. That'll make the sketching a little bit easier. And we can draw another circle. And then for this middle circle, we'll use the Convert Entities tool that we learned about last time. So you click on that, and then just select the middle circle, since that's going to be the same diameter. We don't have to have another dimension on it. Again, for this outer circle, we'll make a dimension. And that's going to be 5.97. Escape to get out of the dimension tool, and you can hit Exit Sketch. And again, so I'm orbiting by pressing the middle mouse button. Might also do it well if you don't have a middle mouse button that I'm not remembering right now. But yeah, so the the extrude feature defaults to the last extrusion depth that you had, so we're also at 0.19, and that'll be fine. So we can hit OK. So now we have a pretty good base for the thrust plate. Something to keep in mind as you're doing CAD is you don't want to make it too complicated in your first run. So theoretically, in both of these sketches, we could have like added these lightning features or these holes. But then going back to edit it, it wouldn't necessarily be clear like where you have to go to edit the holes. Like sometimes what people do is actually name these. So if you right click and hit rename tree item, you can say like base extrude. And I don't know what you would call this upper one, but name it something descriptive. And that way, as people are looking through these, they know what they're doing. But it is always a good idea to try and separate out things and not have like super complicated sketches, because then if you have like a really complicated sketch, it can just be annoying to look at in itself. So splitting these up makes it really easy to edit these things. So we can now look at doing the actual lightning features. So for that, we'll come up. So there's extruded boss base, and everything in this little box is creating geometry, and everything in this box is removing geometry. So cutting stuff away. Extrude to cut is the exact same thing as an extrude. You just go the other way, basically, cut it away. So we'll hit extrude to cut. We'll select the top face of this. And again, hit Control-8. And what we'll do to create these slots is just use the curved slot tool, which is a feature right here. So they have various options for straight slots, and if you scroll all the way down, they have center point arc slot. You can hit that. And we'll select this point in the middle as our center point. I guess I should say, for any of the arcs, whether it's the arc slot or just like a normal arc, depending on which one you select, it'll have a different way you select the points. So like for the center point arc slot, you can see there, the first one was the center point. The next one was the starting point of the arc, and the next one was the ending point of the arc. And that's all explained to you in these boxes here that show up. So if I was going to do the tangent one, number 1 is the tangent, or the point tangent to whatever line I'm drawing off of, and number 2 is the end point of the arc. If I was doing a 3-point arc, first point is the starting point, second one is the ending point, and third one is a middle point. It doesn't necessarily have to be the center point, but somewhere along that. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's the same exact thing for these slots. So you can see for this center point arc slot, first want to select the center. Next, we want to select the starting point of the arc. And we'll drag that out and select the ending point of the arc, which are just in space for now. And then because it's a slot, we'll have another point, which will let us choose how thick we want the slot to be. So once we have that, go back to the drawings. I didn't fully dimension this drawing, actually, now that I'm looking at it. So that's my fault. I'll make another one and send it out later, but I can just tell you the dimensions for now. So smart dimension, and we'll select between the 2 points of the arc. And we'll get a dimension like that. Inch is fine. To set so keep in mind, anything that's blue is unconstrained or not fully constrained. So clicking and dragging it will tell you in which ways it's not fully constrained. So right now we can still move this in and out. So we'll dimension off this center line, which has a radius of 2.3. And then, yes, so it's my fault for not fully dimensioning this, but the angular position of this is 45 degrees offset from the main axis. So what we can do is up in the line tool, rather than drawing a regular line, we'll draw a center line, which again that's your construction geometry. So it doesn't like create an enclosed surface or an enclosed area. So we can draw a construction line from the origin to the midpoint of this line. Hit escape to get out of that. This out a little bit. And then what we can do, this is something that's super useful, come up and make another center line. And on the left here, you'll see we have a couple of options. First off is orientation. So we can set the orientation of the line. Obviously, you can just click and drag it and it will like snap in a horizontal, snap in a vertical. And if you need an angle, you can just draw it randomly and dimension it later. But sometimes it's useful to be able to say, this line has to be horizontal, or this line has to be at this angle, and then you can type in whatever it is. But more important for us right now is we have these options. So for construction is already on because we hit center line, but we'll choose infinite length. And that way, when we set it as at the center point, we just draw out horizontal. Because I didn't select the horizontal constraint, it's still blue, but it's snapped horizontal. So sometimes this happens, you just kind of click on it and drag it, and it will realize, yeah, this line is supposed to be horizontal. But this center line is now like it goes on forever. So that's a really useful way to get like your horizontal and vertical axes. You don't always need both. So in this case, we only really need one. But depending on how complex your sketch is, sometimes it's useful to make both these, and then you can dimension multiple things off of them. But we will do a smart dimension, and we've mostly done linear dimensions so far and radial dimensions, but it'll also do angular dimensions if you choose your lines right. So just select between those two lines, click, and we'll type in 45 degrees. Escape again, and we'll end it off with one more center line from the end of this arc to the center. And we will do another angular dimension between this 45 degree line and that line, and we will set it to 22.5. So there you have your fully constrained sketch. See, it's all black. Can click and drag any points, and it says fully defined in the bottom here. So what we'll do right now is get into a little bit of sketch patterning. So there are two options in sketches when you make them, is you can do a linear sketch pattern or a circular sketch pattern. And all the patterns do is just create multiple copies of the geometry in certain ways. So a linear sketch pattern, when you have an enclosed area, you can hover over the enclosed area and that'll highlight all of the lines that make it up. So you can just click in the middle to select all of those. And then I can say I want, so the direction is already selected along the x-axis. I want whatever it is, 2-inch spacing. I want 5 of them. And it will copy these parts all in the same direction. I don't know exactly what happened there, but we're not doing a linear pattern, so don't really have to worry about it. So you can hit Control-Z if you did it. What we'll do is a circular sketch pattern. So again, just drop it down in there. It asks us all these boxes that show up. You can theoretically hover over them. That's not showing up. I don't know, maybe it's something to do with screen sharing, but you should be able to hover over them, and it'll bring up a little box that says like what this is. This is the center point of your rotation, so we'll select center point of the circle. And your guys might not have been set up like that. I don't know what the defaults are depending. So So we'll choose the equal spacing box if it's not ticked off, and that means that this angular dimension that we choose. So if I just want to make something that's patterned like this, you turn off equal spacing, and then there's 73 degrees between each of these points radially. If I want to have something patterned all the way around in the circle, you just select equal spacing, and then that will be at 360 degrees. So rather than it being 360 degrees between this point and this point, it's now 360 degrees around back to this point, basically. And obviously between that, if I turn off equal spacing, there's 90 degrees between each item. And that's set by the number of items, which is down here. So if I change that to 5, turn off equal spacing, and it's at 72 degrees. So that's the general idea. But we will have 360 degree equal spacing with 4 objects. Center point is the origin of the system, and you can just hit the green check mark. And now we have 4 of these guys in exactly this profile. Everyone keeping up with that? I'll assume yes. So can exit sketch. And now we'll do some more interesting stuff with the Extrude tool. So previously we did a blind extrude, which is just, you just put in how far you want your extrude to go. But if you drop this down, so first off, I guess you can choose which direction you want the extrude to go just by hitting this button. In our case, we want to cut into the part, so we'll leave it at what it was. And there are a bunch of other options for your extrusions. So the one we're using right now is through all. So that just means no matter how thick this geometry is, like we can make this 3 times as thick, it would still cut all the way through it. There's through all both, which you can choose different directions. So like you can both cut down this way and up the other way. So through all both just turns on through all on both these directions. If you need to go the other way, you just hit this checkbox and it drops down. Up to next will go up until the cut, like the hole that you're making, reaches another face. So that accomplishes the same thing as through all in this sketch, but let's say we had already had a cutout in here, then it wouldn't necessarily go to the bottom face. So it's usually not the best thing to choose, because if you add something between, let's say we added, I don't know, some feature that we drew on this plane and it was like a little cavity. I don't know, you'd have to 3D print this or something, but then this cut, without you knowing, would only go to that middle plane instead of going all the way to the bottom. So it's not usually ideal. Up to vertex allows you to select a point, and we don't actually have any points on this because it's just all circles, so can't actually do anything. But if I were to able to select a point on the bottom here, then it would go until it's horizontal with that point. Up to surface, that way I can select a surface on the bottom, so the bottom surface in this case. And that'll make it so that it the cut ends at that surface. That's usually the better alternative to up to next, because you're always going to have the surface that you define. Offset from surface is also sometimes useful. So in this case, you again select a surface, but then you can say, I want to go 0.1 inches away from that surface. So in that case, looking at it from the side, this dimension here is 0.1 inches. And you can, well, it's gone away for whatever reason, but. And you can also make it go, if you hit this reverse offset button, you can make it go 0.1 inches farther than the surface. So that's a powerful tool. Up to body is the same thing as up to surface, up to vertex, except you choose a body. And midplane allows you to set a cut distance, and then it's a symmetric cut on either side of the sketch plane. So if I was doing 0.1 inches, then it's 0.05 inches on the top and 0.05 inches on the bottom. So that's a quick rundown of all of the options as far as extrudes, but like I said, we'll just stick with through all because this is going to go all the way through our part. And once you've done that, you can hit OK. And final thing to add will be the holes. So we can do another extruded cut and press Ctrl-8 to get to our sketch view. And a really easy way to dimension a radial hole pattern like this, is to set the, just make a circle with that radius. So 2.3 is 4.6 diameter. So we'll draw that. Right now, this is a closed sketch, but we want this to be a construction line. So if you click on it, at the little box that'll say for construction, hit that. We can smart dimension this to be 4.6 inches. And then when you hover over a circle like this, these little diamonds will come up, and those are at like your 0, 90, 180, 270 degree angles, or horizontal and vertical from the center point. So we can just click and draw 4 circles at those points. Out of that tool with escape, and then to make them so we don't have to, okay, well, so this is going to be a 0.26 inch diameter hole. So we'll dimension 1, and then rather than going through and dimensioning all of them the same way, we'll use our sketch relations. So we'll click on one, hold Control, and click on the rest of them. And then we can come up here and hit equal. And that'll mean that all of these holes now have the same diameter, because you can see they're all fully constrained because they are horizontal and vertical and all based off this one dimension. Can end the sketch. And again, we'll just go through all on the cut. So that's your part. It's a pretty simple process. Any questions about those?
No.
Cool. But yeah, so let's consider now, like I was talking about at the last session, about design intent and making sure the part is easily editable. So what do we think are the changes that would reasonably be made to this part? Any thoughts? I think the most common change would be changing this outside, or these outside diameters. So if we use a different airframe, a smaller airframe, they'll have a different internal diameter and a different external diameter. Another change might be making, like moving these holes in and out, or changing the size or number of the hole cutouts. Those are less common, I'd say. So let's go through the process of making those edits. Let's say we want this to now be 5.5 inches on the outside, and this is going to be 5.4 inches on the inside to fit with the new airframe. So to make those changes, we need to come back in here, edit our first sketch. This guy now has to be 5.5. Close that. And we'll edit our second sketch. This has to be 5.4. And we'll close that again. Obviously, this isn't quite right, so let's resize our geometry here. So you You know, the 2.3 probably isn't a bad radius, but this is going to have to be more like 0.5 inches. And sometimes it doesn't update. You'll see a little traffic light icon on the features that haven't updated and in the bottom. That just means that is the rebuild tool. So basically it just hasn't recalculated with the new dimensions that you put in. So you can come up here and hit the rebuild thing and it'll change it. So I lied, the 2.3 is actually a really weird dimension. So we'll edit that again. Let's just make it to 2.1. And we can make this like 0.75. And I'm just double clicking on these dimensions to edit them. So there's that. And then our holes are also way out there. So we'll have to right click, edit sketch, and change this dimension. So what did we say? 2.1, so 4.2. Get us on the same axis. And then we decide, well, okay, so it's a smaller airframe, smaller motor, so we'll actually make this less thick. So we have to right click on the extrude and click edit feature, and that'll let us change that. So this is now 0.15 inches, let's say. And okay, we have to do it on this one too. And then we get a reasonable truss plate. But you can see in that, we literally had to go to pretty much every single feature to make those changes. So sometimes you'll have to, like, the part is just so complicated that it has to be that way, but there's always a lot of better ways to do it than that will avoid that. So let's go through some of those, and what we'll use, I guess the other thing that I didn't do is change like the number of these. So we can, like, let's say now we wanted 6 lightning holes. How do you even get in this? You need to like right click on it. Damn, I don't even know how to edit the patterns. Well, okay. However you would figure out actually how to get into the patterns, you would have to do that and change the pattern. And then that would also mess up your holes. So you'd have to go into the holes and change their location, and it would be kind of a mess. So let's look at a better way to do this. We'll make a new part. Same thing with IPS, making sure you're on that. And instead of doing an extrude for this stepped face here, we'll actually do a revolve. So the revolve boss base is the same concept as an extrude. You take a closed surface, but instead of just pulling it out linearly, you choose a central axis and wrap it around that. So I mean, think back to like whatever that was, pre-calc, regular calc, I don't know, for like volumes of revolution. That's all you're doing. So for the revolve boss base, we will select the right plane as our plane to do our sketch on, which you'll see why in a second. And essentially all you have to do is imagine this was like a section view, so you could actually see the middle hole there that we don't have lines for. And we'll just recreate that geometry. So you can just kind of start a line wherever, draw out, bit up, bit in, bit up, bit in, to there. And now we have a lot of time when you're doing sketches, like you don't need to try and make it reasonable. Like it's useful to make it snap when things are going to be horizontal and vertical, but like I didn't need to make this whatever size it actually needs to be, because when I dimension it, that's when I'll do that. So things to add, we want that axis that we're going to be revolving around, which is going to be our middle axis. So I'll come up here, drop down, center line again. We can hit vertical, and we can hit infinite length. We just select this middle point. And there we go, there's our axis. For the origin of this part origins are a complex thing in themselves, thinking about what logically works, what's going to work when you actually go to assemble this part with other parts. So I won't get into it now, but we'll say that we want this bottom point here to be horizontal with this point. So again, we can hold Control, click this point, click the origin. On the left here, we'll have a horizontal relation. Now, the other reason that center lines are useful up in here is because when you're doing a revolve, so we have this dimension called out on the drawing as 3.11 for this internal hole. And that is a diameter. So if I was just like dimensioning it to this point, I'd have to go 3.11 divided by 2. And then this dimension, if I want to go change it in the future, it's not matched to the one that's in the drawing. So it's kind of weird. With center lines, what you can do is if you dimension between an object and a center line, you can dimension it the same way if you'd like, or if you drag your mouse over to the other side, it'll do a diameter dimension. So obviously this isn't actually dimensioning to anything physical, but it knows that it's really just twice this length. So we'll set that to 3.11. You can do the same for these bottom two. 1, 2, and 5.97. When you make your sketches, you can put the dimension lines wherever you want, but it's nice to like stack them so people can easily see like, okay, this goes there, this goes there, this goes there, and it's all out of the way of the geometry. Like you wouldn't want to have your number in there because that can get cluttered depending on what you want to add. So keep the numbers outside of the geometry, have some leader lines to keep it visible. So now let's look at this. So we have two blue lines still, which are the height of these steps and the whole thing. So thinking about what we're really interested in the thrust plate, we're really interested in the thickness of the thrust plate in total, because that's going to set how big of a motor you can handle with it. So rather than calling this out as 0.19 and calling this out as 0.19, we'll set this dimension to 0.375 is the actual dimension. And you can see we still have this one to drag. We just want this in the middle. So if we control click this top line and this bottom line, we can apply our equal constraints to it. And now we have a fully defined geometry. Around. And when I hit exit sketch, we hit revolve, so it knows, okay, this center line is going to be the axis that they want to revolve around. Same with Extrude, you have a couple of options in Revolve, up to vertex, up to surface, offset from surface. We don't have any surfaces or vertexes to do this with, so it's not going to do anything. Midplane, if I just wanted to make like a little wedge, again, this does 10 degrees on either side if it's like 20 degrees, versus if I did blind, it's just 20 degrees on one side. But if we do blind and we do 360 degrees, that'll wrap it all the way around. And we can hit OK. So in one sketch, we are basically to where we were after, or in one feature, we're to where we were after two features in this previous one. And the sketch that we have, it now makes it really easy to change. Like, let's say we want this to now be our 5.5. Change that number. Change that number. Oh, don't change that number, I guess. Change the smaller dimension first, so that it doesn't overlap and be weird. Change 5, 5.5. This is now 0.3, and we're just changing 3 dimensions in a single sketch. So it's way simpler to make those edits. I'll back that out. So to do our lightning holes, we will do another extruded cut on the top face. I'll hit Control-8. And we'll set up our lines again. So vertical, I guess that was horizontal last time, wasn't it? I think that horizontal, we'll get our curved slot. And now instead of dimensioning it, just setting a dimension for this middle line, then if we make it smaller, then it's still at the same position and we saw it can cut away. So what do we really want with these lightning holes? Well, they're not like critical features as far as position. We'd more just want them in the middle. So what we can do is grab a center line. And if you highlight over, so you don't have to hit convert entities to get geometry into a new sketch, you can just highlight over it and it will say, okay, yeah, you want this to be here. So we can draw a center line just kind of randomly between the very outside and the very inside. And then we'll draw another one to the midpoint. So this doesn't do very much for us right now, but if we control click and highlight both of these, we can say collinear, which means they just lie along the same line. And now we have a radial line. And what we can do is take this point and control click and highlight. So 2 ways to do this, which are you select this point and then select this line by control clicking, and then you can apply a midpoint constraint. And that just moves this point to the midpoint of this line. Or you can select this point, and then if you hover over near where the midpoint is of a line, a little square will pop up, and that's your midpoint. So you can just select 2 points and say coincident. I don't know that one is better than the other. If I had to choose, I'd probably say midpoint, because you can see there are these little green boxes that show up to tell you what constraints there are. So like this is a horizontal, this flat one, all these points with 3 lines coming off of them are coincident. So it just lies upon that thing, whatever it's touching. So if you select this point and then select this line and do a midpoint constraint, then you get a different icon than the coincident constraint. So you know that it's a midpoint constraint. I don't know that anyone really looks back at these that specifically because they are kind of small and annoying, but it's useful to think about. Once we've done that, then rather than setting this dimension in here and being like, okay, I want you to be 1 inch. Well, it might not be 1 inch if your part is smaller. So what we can do is say we want this distance between the edge of the slot and the edge of the hole to be whatever it is, 0.2 inches. And now because we have a midpoint constraint on this, it's also 0.2 inches from the edge of this, the outside of the part to the top of this slot over here. And we'll set our 22.5 degree alignment again. And it's still blue, so what's happening? Well, we can still rotate it like this. So we'll do another dimension, center line to center line, call that 45. Now we're fully defined. All the geometry is black and click and drag. That's good. And we won't do a sketch pattern because, like I showed you, sketch patterns are awful. They're really hard to edit and it's just not ideal. So we'll finish the extrude, we'll do through all, and then we'll get one of these guys. And what we'll do now is our next thing for today, which is feature patterns. So same concept as your sketch patterns, you have linear patterns, circular patterns, does have all these different guys, which are more complicated and don't really need to worry about them right now. So we'll do another linear pattern, or circular pattern, excuse me. For our direction, again, this is our central axis. So you could make an axis here. I'll show you guys reference geometry in a sec, but you can also select circular items, and those will be an axis reference, a center point reference. So select the inside of this, you can select the outside of the part, any of these edges, doesn't really matter. Then in our features, you can either drop this guy down to actually select the cut feature, or just click on a surface that was created by that feature. And again, we're in equal spacing mode, 360 degrees. We want 4 of them. It's all set up for us already. If you're in instant spacing, I think it does default to instant spacing if it's your first time using it. So instant spacing, you could accomplish the same thing by setting this to 90 degrees, but we'll just leave it as equal spacing for now. And we hit OK. So there we get our parts. And last but not least, we will do our holes again. Again, you can go Control-H, and this will just do the same way as we did previously. There's probably an argument to be made for linking the holes to the slot sketch, because if we say wanted to change the number of slots from 4 to 5, we'd want then 5 holes probably. But at the same time, if we wanted to change the number of slots from 4 to 8, we don't then want 8 holes, because 4 holes are more than enough to mount this plate to whatever we're mounting it to. So the part is made to be symmetric radially, so doing 5, 6 slots wouldn't really make that much sense. So we'll do our 4 holes again. We'll make them all equal. Set this to be 0.26. And in this case, we could do the same thing where it's like setting the midpoint between these two lines and putting this on there. The issue with that is we're really concerned with what the specific dimension that this circle is. So if you have like a really weird dimension on either of these circles, then you're not going to know how far apart these holes are without like actually going in and making a sketch and then measuring it and checking it, and it's just going to be annoying. So in this case, this is a feature that needs to match to another part. So we will dimension it off itself. Fine. That does mean that if we need to go through and edit it, that we need to make an edit to both this revolve and this cut. But it's more important that we know what this dimension is for linking it to other parts. So that's a thing we'll deal with. So same thing again. Let's go through, having made the part, change this to 5.4, change this to 5.5, change this to just updates. So our holes are no longer in the middle, so we might want to change that. But our part might, our other part that bolts to this might then have a different hole diameter too that we need to go in and change. So that can then be set to 2 or whatever manually. So 2 quick edits, no rebuilds. It's just overall, like that's a better way to do the part. I said I'd do reference geometry with you quickly. So reference geometry, axes are probably, well, you probably use plane and axis like at the same rate. A plane is, obviously you can like do a sketch off this top plane, which we did for these 2 features. You could also click on the top plane and just have the same plane, or you could offset it by a certain amount. you can do a mid plane between two surfaces. So I could select the top and bottom here, and now this plane is perfectly in the middle between them. And the other one that's useful is a tangent plane. So if you select a circular surface and then you select usually just one of the default planes to be either parallel or perpendicular to, now you can have a tangent plane. So if you need to do like a cut from the outside, that'll allow you to have a sketch plane to work on. And then axes, you can set up either by selecting a cylindrical surface, and then you get this axis in here. You can also do it between two planes. So if I select the top plane and the right plane, you can see we create that same axis. And if I had any straight lines, you could do it along a straight line or between 2 points. I think we have some points in there. So yeah, I can do it between 2 points like that. If for some reason I needed that axis, but for simple 2D parts like this, you don't really need to worry about creating them. So yeah. Any questions about that? Cool. That's pretty much all I had for today. I think what I'll do is I'll have you guys try and create this part now when it loads. It's the same concept. Some of the sketching is a little bit more involved. Like this funky profile might take a second to get right, but this part is made by the same process. You do a revolve, you do some cuts to get these webs out, and then you pattern that cut all the way around. Oh yeah, so this is a 2-page doc, so you need to go to the second page to get the dimensions for these cuts, but pretty simple. Let me know if you have any questions with it, and I will stop recording.